Alexander now took the decision to disband his navy. His reasons were lack of funds at the time and the realization that his fleet was no match for the Persians in a battle. He was not prepared to put even part of his force at risk. He also reckoned that with his land forces already in control of Asia, he had no further need of a fleet and could break the Persian navy by capturing the cities on the coast, thus depriving them of recruitment sources for their crews and of land bases in Asia. This was how he interpreted the significance of the eagle. He would conquer the ships from dry land. This decision implemented, Alexander set out for Caria on reports that a substantial force of barbarians and foreign mercenaries was concentrated in Halicarnassus. He captured the cities between Miletus and Halicarnassus at first assault and made camp against Halicarnassus about half a mile from the city, prepared for a long siege. The site was naturally strong, and any apparent deficiencies in its security had long been completely seen to by Memnon, who was there in person, had now been appointed by Darius commander of Lower Asia and of the entire navy. A large number of foreign mercenary troops had been left in the city, together with many of the Persians themselves, and triremes had the harbour blocked, giving significant naval assistance to the defence. On the first day, as Alexander approached the wall near the gates leading to Mylasa, there was a sally by the troops in the city and some long-range shooting. Alexander's men had no difficulty in repelling this assault with a countercharge and shutting them back in the city. A few days later, Alexander took the foot guards, the companion cavalry, and the infantry brigades of Amyntas, Perdiccas, and Meleager, together with the archers and the Agrianians, and went round the city to the side facing Myndus, to see if the wall was more open to assault on that side, and also to explore the possibility of a sudden quick raid to capture Myndus. He saw that possession of Myndus would be a great benefit in the siege of Halicarnassus, and there had in fact been some proposal of surrender from the Myndians if he could approach undetected at night. So he went in person up to the Myndus wall around midnight as agreed. There was no sign of surrender from the men inside, and he had not brought with him his siege engines or ladders. He had not set out for a siege, but in expectation of the city's betrayal and surrender. Even so, he brought up the Macedonian phalanx and ordered them to undermine the wall. The Macedonians did bring down one tower, but its collapse did not lay the wall open. The people inside put up a vigorous resistance, which combined with the arrival now of considerable reinforcement from Halicarnassus by sea, made it impossible for Alexander to succeed in this improvised and hasty attempt to take Myndus. So he returned with nothing of his purpose achieved, and applied himself once more to the siege of Halicarnassus. First, he began to fill in the moat which they had dug in front of the city, about 45 feet wide and 23 feet deep. This was to facilitate the positioning of the siege towers for the bombardment of the defenders of the wall and of the other engines for battering the wall. The moat was filled without difficulty, and he began now to bring up the towers. A night sally from Halicarnassus to set fire to the towers and the other engines which had been moved up or were nearly in position was countered and easily beaten back within the walls by the Macedonian guards, supported by other troops roused by the alarm. About 170 of the men from Halicarnassus were killed, including Neoptolemus, the son of Anabasis and brother of Amyntas, one of those who had deserted to Darius. The losses among Alexander's troop amounted to 16, but some 300 were wounded, as this was a sudden action at night and they were not wearing proper protective armor. Not many days later, two Macedonian hoplites from Perdiccas' brigade, tentmates and drinking companions, were boasting to each other and talking up their own prowess and exploits. Rivalry ensued, heated by the wine. The result was that they armed themselves and set out on their own to attack the wall at the high point, which faces in the direction of Mylasa. Their idea was to prove their own virility, rather than to provoke a dangerous clash with the enemy. Some of the troops in the city saw them, just two men approaching the wall for no apparent reason, and ran out to confront them. The two men killed any who came close and hurled missiles at those who kept their distance. Despite being outnumbered and handicapped by the lie of the land, At this point, more of Perdiccas' men ran out to join the fray, and others from the city too, and a fierce fight developed by the wall. The sallying party was again driven back inside the gates by the Macedonians, and indeed, the city came close to being captured. At that time, the walls were not strictly guarded, and a stretch of two towers and the curtain wall between them had collapsed to the ground, which would have offered a relatively easy way in if the whole army had applied itself to the business. The next tower too had been weakened, and undermining could have brought it down without difficulty. But the enemy foreclosed this opportunity by building a crescent shaped brick wall on the inner side as a replacement for the collapsed length of wall. With many hands available for the work, this was easily accomplished. On the next day, Alexander brought up his engines against the new wall, and once more there was a sortie from the city to set fire to the machines. Part of the line of wickerwork shelters close to the wall and part of one of the wooden towers were destroyed by fire, but the rest was saved by the troops under Philetus and Helleniccus, who had been detailed to protect them. When Alexander also appeared at the point of assault, the men who had sallied out ran back inside the wall, dropping the torches they had brought with them, and most throwing away their arms as well. And yet at first, the besieged had the best of it, given the natural advantage of their elevated position and the fact that they could shoot at the troops up with the siege engines, not only from in front, but also from the towers left standing on either side of the collapsed wall, which allowed them fire from the flanks and almost at the rear of those attacking the replacement wall. Not many days later, Alexander again brought up his engines against the inner brick wall and supervised the operation himself. There was now a sally from the city in full force. Some attacked by the collapsed stretch of wall where Alexander himself was positioned, and others at the Tripylon gate, where the Macedonians were least expecting it. The first party threw torches on the siege engines and anything else which could start a fire and feed it into a blaze. But there was a vigorous counterattack by the men with Alexander. Large stones were hurled and missiles fired from the catapults on the wooden towers, and this party was easily repulsed and set running back into the city. There was considerable slaughter in this area, proportionate to the greater numbers and the greater daring of the sally. Some died in hand-to-hand battle with the Macedonians, others in the rubble of the collapsed wall, where the only open way through was too narrow for their number, and it was difficult to climb over the fallen masonry. The party making the sortie by the Tripylon gate were met by Ptolemy, the royal bodyguard, bringing up the battalions of Aedeus and Timander and some of the light troops. They too had no difficulty in turning back this party from the city. In the retreat, they had to run back over a narrow bridge built over the moat, which collapsed under their numbers and threw many of them into the moat, where some were trampled to death by their fellows and others shot down by the Macedonians from above. The greatest carnage took place around the gates themselves. In the panic of the moment, the gates were shut too soon. The fear was that the Macedonians would burst in hard behind the fugitives. So many of their own side were denied entrance and were destroyed by the Macedonians right under the walls. The city would have been close to capture if Alexander had not decided to call off his army. He still hoped to save Halicarnassus if the inhabitants would make some positive move to surrender. The dead numbered about 1,000 on the city side and about 40 of Alexander's men, including Ptolemy the bodyguard, Clearchus, the commander of the archers, Aedeus, and some other Macedonians of note.